Mrs. Vanderburg, I need to speak with you privately. I discovered something in the test results that no one else can know about, especially not your son. Dr. Leander Shaw's hands were trembling as he closed the door to his office. I had known this man for exactly 72 hours, 3 days since my husband Oliver collapsed during a business meeting with investors and was rushed to Mount Sinai with a ruptured cerebral aneurysm. 3 days of sitting in uncomfortable waiting room chairs, of watching machines breathe for the man I had loved for 28 years, of holding my son Emmett's hand while doctors spoke in their clinical language about brain swelling and induced comas and critical windows. And now this. The neurologist who had been professional and composed for 3 solid days looked like he might be sick on his expensive Italian shoes. What is it? My voice came out steadier than I felt. I was Linnea Vanderburg. I had built a contemporary art gallery from nothing into a $7 million business. I had survived the 2008 financial crisis when half my competitors closed their doors. I could handle bad news. Is Oliver's condition worse than you told us? No, it's not that. Dr. Shaw gestured to the chair across from his desk, but I remained standing. He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something in his eyes that made my stomach drop. Not pity, but dread. The kind of look someone gives you right before they detonate your entire world. Mrs. Vanderburg, as part of the protocol for coma patients, we run extensive blood work. Your husband's results came back this morning, and I noticed something unusual. Something that led me to cross-reference with your son's medical records from when he had his appendectomy here 2 years ago. My fingers tightened on the strap of my Hermes bag. I don't understand what Emmett's appendectomy has to do with Oliver's condition. It doesn't. Not directly. Dr. Shaw opened a manila folder on his desk with the careful movements of someone handling a live explosive. Mrs. Vanderburg, I need you to understand that what I'm about to show you, I'm violating several protocols by sharing this with you. But I'm also a father, and I believe you have a right to know this information before making any medical decisions regarding your husband's care. You're scaring me, Dr. Shaw. I'm sorry. That's not my intention. He turned the folder around so I could see the lab results printed on hospital letterhead. 2 columns of information, technical medical terminology that meant nothing to me until he pointed to 2 specific lines highlighted in yellow. This is your husband's blood type, AB negative, and this is your son's blood type from his surgical records. O positive. I stared at the numbers like they were written in a foreign language. I'm not a doctor. What does that mean? It means it's biologically impossible for your husband to be your son's biological father. The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually reached out and gripped the edge of his desk because my knees had gone weak. That's impossible. There must be a mistake. Labs make mistakes all the time. You need to retest. We ran the panel twice because of the unusual AB negative result. There's no error, Mrs. Vanderburg. Dr. Shaw's voice was gentle but firm. A man with AB negative blood cannot father a child with O positive blood. It's basic genetics. Impossible, not improbable. I lowered myself into the chair because standing was no longer an option. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of information that made no sense at all. Emmett was our son, our biological son. I had been pregnant with him. I had felt him move inside me. I had gone through 18 hours of labor at this very hospital 27 years ago. I had photographs, baby books, ultrasound images. I had stretch marks and a C-section scar and memories of nursing him at 3 a.m. while Oliver slept peacefully beside me. There has to be an explanation, I said, hearing the desperation in my own voice. Maybe Oliver's blood type is wrong. Maybe he never knew his actual blood type. That's certainly possible, Dr. Shaw said, but his tone suggested he didn't believe it. Or there could be other explanations. Hospital mix-ups do happen, though they're extremely rare. Or, he paused, clearly uncomfortable. Or there might be circumstances regarding your son's conception that you're not aware of. The implication hung in the air between us like poison gas. He was suggesting that I had cheated on Oliver, that Emmett was the result of an affair I'd had 28 years ago. "I have never been unfaithful to my husband," I said coldly. "Not once in 28 years of marriage. Not before, not during, not ever." "I believe you, Mrs. Vanderburg, which is why I wanted to show you this privately." He pulled another sheet from the folder. "This is the timeline from your medical records. You gave birth to your son on March 15, 1997 at 2:47 a.m. Normal vaginal delivery after 18 hours of labor. Baby was taken to the nursery for routine procedures while you recovered. Everything standard protocol." I remembered that night. Every excruciating minute of it. Oliver had been there the whole time, holding my hand, telling me I was doing great, cutting the umbilical cord when the doctor offered him the scissors. We had cried together when they placed Emmett on my chest, this tiny, red-faced human we had created together. Except apparently, we hadn't created him together. "What are you trying to tell me, Dr. Shaw?" He met my eyes directly, and I saw genuine compassion there mixed with something else. Anger, maybe, or disgust. "I'm telling you that something about your son's birth doesn't add up. And given that your husband is currently unable to provide answers, I thought you deserved to know this information so you could make informed decisions moving forward. Both about his medical care and about your family." My phone buzzed in my purse. A text from Emmett. "Mom, where are you? Dad's nurse said you left the ICU. Everything okay?" Everything was not okay. Nothing would ever be okay again. "Does anyone else know about this?" I asked. "No one. I haven't documented my findings in your husband's chart. I'm not sure I even should. But as I said, I'm a father. If someone had done something to compromise my family's integrity, I would want to know." He closed the folder and slid it across the desk to me. "These are copies for you. The originals remain in the system, but no one has any reason to look at them the way I did unless they're specifically looking for a genetic discrepancy." I took the folder with numb fingers. "Why? Why are you doing this for me?" Dr. Shaw leaned back in his chair, and for the first time since I had met him 3 days ago, he looked less like a detached medical professional and more like a human being carrying his own burdens. 20 years ago, my father died of a genetic condition that runs in our family. A condition my mother knew about but never told him about because she was afraid he wouldn't marry her if he knew. He died at 52, and 3 weeks after his funeral, I found the medical records she'd hidden. I've spent 2 decades wondering what our lives would have been like if we'd known the truth sooner. If we'd had the chance to make different choices. He straightened some papers on his desk unnecessarily. "I don't know what happened with your son's birth, Mrs. Vanderburg, but I know that secrets like this have a way of destroying families from the inside out. You deserve the chance to uncover the truth before it destroys anything else." I stood up, clutching the folder to my chest like a shield. "Thank you, Dr. Shaw, I think. I'm sorry I had to be the one to tell you." He stood as well. "Your husband's prognosis remains unchanged. We'll continue monitoring him closely. If you need anything, counseling resources, recommendations for a geneticist, anything at all, please don't hesitate to ask." I nodded mutely and left his office. The hallway was bright and sterile and filled with the sounds of a hospital at work, beeping monitors, muted conversations, the squeak of rubber-soled shoes on linoleum, normal sounds. The sounds of a normal day in a normal world where husbands were actually the fathers of their children and wives didn't discover 27 years later that their entire lives might be built on a lie. Emmett was waiting for me outside the ICU, looking impossibly young despite being a 27-year-old corporate attorney with a corner office and a 6-figure salary. He had Oliver's dark hair and olive complexion, but my blue eyes and the dimple in his chin that my mother had passed down to me. Except maybe he didn't have my eyes. Maybe he had someone else's eyes that just happened to be blue. Maybe he had nothing of me at all except 27 years of memories and love. "Mom, You look pale. What did Dr. Shaw want? I manufactured a smile that felt like broken glass. Just some paperwork issues with the insurance. Nothing to worry about. Are you sure? You seem upset. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just tired. The lie came easily, smoothly, and I hated myself for it. I had never lied to Emmett, not about anything that mattered. Why don't you go home and get some rest? There's no point in both of us staying here tonight. I'll call you if anything changes. I don't want to leave you alone. I won't be alone. I'll be with your father. Another lie. Oliver was a body connected to machines. He wasn't really there at all. And according to the blood work in the folder I was clutching, maybe he had never really been there. Maybe the man I thought I knew was a stranger who had kept secrets so devastating that they rewrote the entire story of my life. Emmett finally agreed to leave after I promised 3 times that I would call him immediately if Oliver's condition changed. I watched him walk down the corridor toward the elevators, this young man I had raised and loved and sacrificed for, and wondered if I was looking at my son or at a stranger's child that I had somehow been tricked into raising as my own. When he was gone, I went into Oliver's ICU room and closed the door behind me. He lay there in the mechanical bed, intubated and monitored and utterly unresponsive. His face was slack, peaceful almost, like he was simply sleeping. Like he might wake up any moment and smile at me and ask what I was so worried about. I pulled the visitor's chair close to his bedside and opened the folder Dr. Shaw had given me. The lab results were still there, still saying the impossible thing they had said in his office. AB negative, O positive, biologically impossible. What did you do, Oliver? I whispered to his unconscious form. What did you do to us? The machines beeped their steady rhythms. The ventilator hissed and wheezed. Oliver lay silent and unknowing, taking all his secrets with him into whatever dark place his mind had retreated to. And I sat there in that sterile room, holding proof that my entire life might be a carefully constructed lie, and began to understand that the man in this bed was either the victim of an inexplicable medical mystery or the architect of a betrayal so profound that it had taken 27 years to surface. Either way, nothing would ever be the same again. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in Oliver's ICU room until the nurses gently suggested I go home around 2 a.m, and then I drove through empty Manhattan streets to our apartment on the Upper East Side. The apartment we had bought 15 years ago when my gallery finally turned its first $1 million profit. The apartment where we had hosted dinner parties and celebrated Emmett's law school acceptance and made love on lazy Sunday mornings and built what I thought was a solid, honest life together. I poured myself 3 fingers of the Macallan 18 that Oliver kept in his study for special occasions and sat in his leather chair surrounded by his things, his architecture books, his framed awards from the American Institute of Architects, the silver-framed photograph of the 3 of us from Emmett's Yale graduation, all of us smiling like we didn't have a care in the world. The photo was taken 6 years ago. Had Oliver known then? Had he looked at Emmett in his cap and gown and felt guilty about whatever secret he was keeping? Or had he compartmentalized so completely that he could smile for the camera without a trace of conscience? I thought about the beginning, about how we met. It was September 1995. I was 27 years old and drowning. I had opened my gallery 6 months earlier with a $70,000 loan from my parents, Polish immigrants who had built a small restaurant empire and wanted their only daughter to follow her passion for art instead of slinging pierogi in a Brooklyn kitchen. The gallery was hemorrhaging money. I was learning the hard way that having an eye for contemporary art didn't automatically translate into knowing how to run a business. I had organized an exhibition for an up-and-coming sculptor, hoping to attract the kind of wealthy collectors who could keep my doors open for another quarter. The opening reception was sparsely attended, maybe 30 people in a space that could hold 100. I was standing by the bar, trying not to look desperate, when Oliver walked in. He was 29, recently divorced, and according to the art consultant who had brought him, one of the city's most promising young architects. He had just won a competition to design a sustainable office building in Brooklyn, and he was looking to buy art for the lobby. He spent an hour walking through the exhibition, asking intelligent questions, and then he bought 3 pieces for a total of $45,000. I could have kissed him right there. Instead, I suggested we have dinner to discuss installation details. We ended up at a small Italian place in the West Village, and somewhere between the appetizers and dessert, the conversation stopped being about art and started being about everything else. He told me about his brief marriage to his college girlfriend, how they had realized within a year that they wanted completely different lives. She wanted to move back to her hometown in Ohio and have babies. He wanted to build revolutionary buildings in New York and change the world. The divorce had been amicable but lonely. I told him about growing up watching my parents work 18-hour days to build their restaurants, about how I had promised myself I would never be financially dependent on anyone, about my terror that the gallery would fail and I would have wasted my parents' hard-earned money on a dream that wasn't sustainable. He looked at me across the candlelit table and said, "You're going to make it. I can tell. You have the hunger." We were inseparable after that. He courted me properly. Flowers sent to the gallery, tickets to the ballet, weekend trips to Boston and Philadelphia to visit museums. He made me feel seen and valued and beautiful. When he proposed 8 months later on the roof of his Tribeca loft with the Manhattan skyline glittering behind him, I said yes without hesitation. We were married in a small ceremony in Cape Cod in June 1996. My parents loved him. His parents, old money Bostonians who I had been terrified to meet, approved of me with the kind of restrained enthusiasm that passed for warmth in their social circle. We honeymooned in Tuscany for 3 weeks, staying in a restored farmhouse and making love in the afternoons while church bells rang in the distance. When we returned to New York, we started trying for a baby immediately. We both wanted children. Oliver said he wanted to do it right this time, build a real family with someone who shared his values and ambitions. I was ready. I had always wanted to be a mother, and at 28, I felt like my life was finally stable enough to bring a child into it. But nothing happened. Month after month, my period arrived like clockwork. I tried not to panic, tried to tell myself that it sometimes took time, but by the end of that first year, I was secretly terrified that something was wrong with me, that my body was broken in some fundamental way. In January 1997, I finally convinced Oliver that we should see a fertility specialist. He was reluctant. He kept saying we should give it more time, that we were both young and healthy, and it would happen naturally. But I insisted. I made the appointments. I dragged him to consultations where doctors asked invasive questions and ordered batteries of tests. And then, miraculously, in February 1997, I missed my period. I took 3 pregnancy tests before I believed it. 3 pink lines appearing like magic on those little plastic sticks. I was pregnant. Finally, after 18 months of trying, of disappointment and tears and fear, I was going to have a baby. Oliver was ecstatic. He picked me up and spun me around our living room and said he had never been happier in his entire life. We called our parents. We bought books on pregnancy and childbirth. We started looking at larger apartments because the 1-bedroom in Tribeca wasn't going to be practical with a baby. I was sick for the first trimester, exhausted for the second, uncomfortable for the third. Oliver attended every prenatal appointment. He held my hand during ultrasounds and cried when we found out we were having a boy. He painted the nursery in our new Upper East Side apartment a soft blue-gray while I sat in the glider chair directing his efforts. Emmett arrived 3 days before his due date after 18 hours of labor. The delivery was textbook normal, according to my obstetrician. I pushed for 2 hours, and then suddenly this tiny, screaming human was being placed on my chest, and Oliver was crying, and I was crying, and the nurses were congratulating us. They took Emmett to the nursery after about 30 minutes so I could rest and be stitched up. Standard protocol, they said. He would be back soon. Oliver went with him because I was too exhausted to move, and when they wheeled me to my recovery room 2 hours later, my husband and son were waiting for me. Oliver was holding this tiny bundle wrapped in a blue blanket, looking at him with such pure love that I felt my heart might burst. "He's perfect," Oliver whispered. "Absolutely perfect." And he was. 10 fingers, 10 toes, a healthy set of lungs that he demonstrated frequently throughout that first night. He had dark hair like Oliver, and blue eyes like me, and that little dimple in his chin that had been passed down through 3 generations of women in my family. Except now I knew that dimple meant nothing. Those blue eyes meant nothing. The blood running through his veins had come from somewhere else, from someone else, and I had no idea how or why or when the switch had happened. I drained the scotch and poured another glass. My hands were shaking. The nurses had taken Emmett to the nursery for routine procedures. That's what they had said, routine procedures. And Oliver had gone with him. Oliver, who had been so reluctant to see fertility specialists. Oliver, who had suddenly become ecstatic when I got pregnant after 18 months of trying. Oliver, who had gone to the nursery with our newborn son while I was being stitched up and recovering from 18 hours of labor. What had happened in that nursery? I stood up and went to Oliver's filing cabinet, the locked one he kept in the corner of his study. He thought I didn't know where he kept the key, but I had found it years ago when I was looking for our tax returns. I had never had a reason to snoop before. I had trusted him completely, stupidly, blindly. The key was still there, taped to the underside of the middle drawer of his desk. I unlocked the filing cabinet and started pulling out folders. Tax returns, investment statements, property deeds, insurance policies. Everything organized with the meticulous attention to detail that made Oliver such a successful architect. And then, in the bottom drawer, I found a folder labeled Personal OW and Associates, LLC. I had never heard of OW and Associates, LLC. Inside the folder were bank statements for an account I didn't know existed, an account that Oliver had opened in 1997, 2 months after Emmett was born, an account that showed monthly transfers of $5,000 to someone listed only as Octavia L. $5,000 a month for 27 years. I did the math in my head. $1,620,000. Oliver had paid someone named Octavia L. over $1.5 million over the course of our son's lifetime, and I had never known about it. My scotch glass slipped from my hand and shattered on the hardwood floor. I didn't bother cleaning it up. I kept digging through the folder with hands that had gone numb. There were photographs, Polaroids, old and faded, the kind people took before digital cameras became ubiquitous. Oliver with a woman I had never seen before. A stunning redhead with green eyes and an artist's bohemian style. They were on a beach somewhere, both of them laughing, his arm around her shoulders. The kind of intimate photograph that spoke of more than friendship. The date stamp on the back said July 1996. 1 month after our wedding. 2 months before I got pregnant. I found newspaper clippings next. Articles about a promising young sculptor named Octavia Larson, who had an exhibition at the Whitney Museum in 1997. There was a photograph of her standing next to one of her pieces, that same wild red hair, that same magnetic smile. And at the very bottom of the folder, I found a business card for a private adoption attorney in New Jersey. The card was dated March 1997, the same month Emmett was born. I sat on the floor of Oliver's study, surrounded by evidence of a betrayal so massive that I couldn't quite process it. My husband had been having an affair during our honeymoon year. He had been paying a woman named Octavia Larson $5,000 a month for 27 years. He had the business card of an adoption attorney from the month our son was born. And our son, my son, the child I had carried and birthed and loved with every fiber of my being, had the wrong blood type to be Oliver's biological child. I reached for my phone and called the only person I could think of who might be able to help me make sense of this nightmare. My college roommate Rebecca, who had become a private investigator after a nasty divorce, had taught her exactly how much people were capable of hiding. She answered on the third ring, her voice groggy with sleep. "Linnea, it's 3 a.m. What's wrong?" "Everything," I said. And then I started crying for the first time since Dr. Shaw had shown me those lab results. "Rebecca, I need you to find someone for me. Her name is Octavia Larson, and I think she might be able to tell me who my son really is." Rebecca showed up at my apartment at 7 a.m. with coffee and the kind of grim determination that made her excellent at her job. I had barely moved from Oliver's study floor, still surrounded by the evidence of his secret life. She took one look at me and pulled me to my feet. "Shower first, then we talk. You look like hell, and you need to be sharp for this." I obeyed mechanically, standing under scalding water until my skin turned red, trying to wash away the feeling that my entire life had been contaminated by lies. When I emerged, Rebecca had cleaned up the broken Scotch glass and laid out all the documents from Oliver's secret folder on his desk in neat rows, like evidence at a crime scene. Which I supposed it was. "Walk me through everything," she said, opening her laptop. "Start from the beginning." I told her about the lab results, about Dr. Shaw's revelation, about finding the folder and the bank statements and the photographs. My voice was steady now, clinical almost, like I was describing something that had happened to someone else. Maybe that was the only way to get through it without completely falling apart. Rebecca typed notes as I spoke, her expression growing darker with each detail. When I finished, she sat back and looked at me with something close to anger. "Your husband is either incredibly stupid or incredibly arrogant. Probably both." She tapped the bank statements. "These transfers are traceable. The photographs are dated. He kept evidence of everything, like he wanted to get caught eventually, or like he was so confident you would never look that he didn't bother hiding it properly. Can you find her, this Octavia Larson?" "Already started while you were in the shower." Rebecca turned her laptop around to show me a LinkedIn profile. Octavia Larson, age 53, artist and sculptor based in New York City. Last known address in the Lower East Side. She's not particularly active on social media, but she has a website for her art. No mention of any children, no husband, no partner. Very private person from what I can tell. I stared at the profile photo. It was definitely the same woman from Oliver's Polaroids, though 27 years older. Her red hair was threaded with gray now, pulled back in a messy bun. She had the kind of face that had aged beautifully. All sharp cheekbones and striking features. She looked tired in the photo, like someone who had lived a hard life. "I need to talk to her," I said. "Linnea, slow down. We need to think about this strategically. If this woman is connected to whatever happened with Emmett's birth, confronting her directly could—" "I don't care about strategy. I need answers. Now, today, before Oliver wakes up and lies to me again. Or before I have to look at Emmett and wonder whose child he really is." My voice cracked on the last words. "Please, Rebecca, help me find her." Rebecca studied my face for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, but I'm coming with you, and we're recording the conversation. Whatever she tells you, we need documentation." We found Octavia's studio in a converted warehouse building on Norfolk Street, squeezed between a bodega and a Vietnamese restaurant. The directory in the lobby listed her as Unit 4C. There was no doorman, no security, just a buzzer system that looked like it hadn't worked in years. We walked up 4 flights of stairs that smelled like cooking oil and marijuana smoke. I knocked on the door marked 4C. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. This was insane. I was about to confront a complete stranger based on 27-year-old photographs and a hunch that might be completely wrong. But the bank statements weren't wrong. $5,000 a month for 27 years wasn't wrong. The door opened, and Octavia Larson stood there in paint-stained overalls and bare feet. She looked at me with those striking green eyes, and I watched all the color drain from her face. "Oh, God," she whispered. "You're Linnea." You're Oliver's wife. So much for wondering if I had the right person. We need to talk, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. About my husband, about the money he's been paying you for almost 3 decades, and about my son. Octavia gripped the doorframe like she needed it for support. He told me this day would never come. He promised me you would never find out. Well, he's in a coma, so he's not in a position to keep promises anymore. Are you going to let us in, or do we have this conversation in the hallway? She stepped back wordlessly, opening the door wider. The studio was exactly what I expected from an artist living on the edge of poverty. One large room with paint-splattered floors, canvases stacked against every wall, a tiny kitchen area in one corner, and a bed in another with a curtain for privacy. Sculptures in various stages of completion covered every available surface. The whole space smelled like turpentine and clay. Rebecca positioned herself near the door while I walked into the center of the room. Octavia closed the door and leaned against it, her arms wrapped around herself like she was cold, despite the stuffy warmth of the studio. "How much do you know?" she asked quietly. "I know that my husband has been paying you $5,000 a month since 1997. I know he had photographs of you from 1996. I know that my son's blood type makes it impossible for Oliver to be his biological father. And I know that there's an adoption attorney's business card in Oliver's secret files from the month Emmett was born." I took a step closer to her. "What I don't know is why. So you're going to tell me, right now, every single detail, or I'm going to the police and the IRS and every journalist in this city with what I've already found." Octavia closed her eyes. A single tear rolled down her cheek. "I never wanted to hurt you. You have to believe that. I never even wanted to meet you. But Oliver said if I didn't agree to his plan, he would disappear completely and I would lose my baby forever." The floor seemed to tilt under my feet. "Your baby." "Emmett is my biological son." Octavia opened her eyes and looked at me with devastation written all over her face. "I gave birth to him on March 12, 1997. 3 days before you gave birth to your son, and Oliver arranged for the babies to be switched so that he could raise my child as his own, with you as the mother who would never know the difference." I couldn't breathe, literally couldn't make my lungs work. Rebecca was suddenly at my side, guiding me to the only chair in the studio that wasn't covered in art supplies. I sat down hard, my vision swimming. "Keep talking," Rebecca said sharply to Octavia, her phone out and obviously recording, "and don't leave out a single detail." Octavia slid down the door until she was sitting on the floor, her knees pulled to her chest. She looked smaller somehow, like the weight of her secret had been holding her together, and now that it was out, she was collapsing in on herself. "I met Oliver in June 1996, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was 25, working as a sculptor, barely making rent. He came to a group exhibition in Chelsea. He said he was interested in commissioning a piece for a building he was designing. We went for coffee to discuss it, and he was charming and successful and interested in my work. I was so flattered that someone like him would pay attention to someone like me." She paused, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "We started seeing each other. He told me he was divorced, that he was single, that he was falling in love with me. I believed him. I was young and stupid, and I believed every word. We were together for about 6 weeks. He was talking about our future, about how he wanted to help me build my career, about trips we would take together. And then I missed my period. My hands were clenched so tightly in my lap that my nails were cutting into my palms. I didn't care. When I told him I was pregnant, everything changed. He came to my apartment and told me the truth, that he had gotten married in June, that his wife was also trying to get pregnant, that he couldn't leave her because she came from money and had connections in the art world that were important for his business. He said the affair was a mistake, that he had been confused after his divorce, that he was sorry, but he couldn't be a father to my baby. "So you decided to give the baby up for adoption," I said hollowly. "No, that's not what happened." Octavia looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. I wanted to keep my baby. I told Oliver I didn't need anything from him, that I would raise the child on my own. But he panicked. He said a paternity suit would destroy his marriage and his career. He said his wife was trying to get pregnant, and if she succeeded around the same time, there would be too many questions, too much risk of the truth coming out. Rebecca was recording everything, her face carved from stone. I felt like I was watching this scene from outside my body. Oliver came back to me 3 weeks later with a proposal. He had found out that you were pregnant too, that your due dates were within days of each other. He said he had a solution that would protect everyone involved. If I agreed to give birth at Mount Sinai Hospital, the same hospital where you were scheduled to deliver, he could arrange for the babies to be switched right after birth. You would raise my baby thinking he was yours. Your baby would be placed for adoption with a good family through a private attorney he trusted. And I would receive monthly payments for the rest of my life to compensate me for giving up my son. I was going to be sick. I was actually going to vomit right there in this woman's studio. I said no, Octavia continued, her voice breaking. I said absolutely not, that it was insane, that it was illegal, that I wouldn't do it. But Oliver was relentless. He came back every week with more arguments. He said my baby would have a better life with you than with me. You were educated, wealthy, established. He said your baby would still have a good life with an adoptive family. He said if I didn't agree, he would make sure I never saw a penny of support, that he would deny paternity, that he would use his connections to destroy any chance I had of succeeding in the art world. And he said if I ever tried to contact my son after the switch, he would go to the police and tell them I was a stalker, that I was mentally unstable, that I was trying to extort him. She was sobbing now, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. I was 25 years old and terrified and alone. My family had disowned me for getting pregnant out of wedlock. I was living in an apartment with 3 roommates, barely affording groceries. And here was this powerful, connected man telling me that the only way my baby would have a good life was if I let him take my child and give it to his wife. What was I supposed to do? You were supposed to say no, I said, my voice like ice. You were supposed to go to the police. You were supposed to tell someone, anyone, what he was planning. You were supposed to protect your baby and mine. I know. Octavia buried her face in her hands. I know. I've lived with that guilt every single day for 27 years, but I was so scared, and he made it sound like the only rational choice. He said you would be a wonderful mother, that you would give my son everything I couldn't. And he said your baby would be adopted by a good family, that it wouldn't be abandoned or put into foster care. He made it sound like everyone would win except me, and that my sacrifice would give my son the life he deserved. Rebecca crouched down next to me, her hand on my shoulder. Linnea, do you need a minute? No. I stood up, my legs shaky but holding. I walked over to where Octavia was sitting and looked down at her. How did he do it, specifically? How did Oliver switch 2 newborn babies in a hospital without anyone noticing? Octavia wiped her face on her sleeve. He bribed a nurse. I don't know her name. She's probably dead now, or at least long retired. But he paid her $50,000 to be on duty the nights we both gave birth. My labor was induced 3 days early, so the timing would work. I gave birth to Emmett on March 12th at 11:47 p.m. They took him away for the standard procedures, and that was the last time I saw my baby. The nurse told me there had been complications, that he needed to be in the NICU, but she wouldn't let me see him. I was so groggy from the pain medication that I didn't fight hard enough. She took a shuddering breath. You gave birth 3 days later. Oliver had told me your labor started, that everything was going according to plan. After you delivered, they took your baby to the nursery for routine procedures. That's when the switch happened. The nurse who Oliver bribed substituted my son for yours. My son went home with you and Oliver. Your son was handed off to the adoption attorney Oliver had arranged, and he was placed with a family somewhere. I don't know where. Oliver never told me. He said it was better if I didn't know, that it would be easier for me to move on. Move on, I repeated numbly. He thought you would just move on from having your baby stolen. I never moved on. I spent the first 5 years trying to find out where my son was, calling Oliver constantly, begging him to let me see Emmett even from a distance. Finally, he agreed to send me occasional photos, as long as I never tried to contact any of you directly. So I got pictures in the mail every few months, birthday parties, first day of school, family vacations. I watched my son grow up in photographs while you got to actually raise him. She looked up at me with something like defiance, now mixing with the guilt. And yes, I took Oliver's money, $5,000 a month for 27 years. Do you know why? Because I earned it. Because every month when that money hit my account, it was a reminder to Oliver that he had done something unforgivable and he would pay for it for the rest of his life. It was the only power I had over him, the only thing that gave me any control over a situation where I had been completely powerless. I had been wrong. I wasn't going to be sick. I was too numb for that, too frozen by the magnitude of what Oliver had done, what he had done to me, to Octavia, to Emmett, to my biological son, whose name I didn't even know. Where is my son? The question came out flat, emotionless. What's his name? Where did Oliver send him? I don't know. I swear I don't know. Oliver handled all of it through the adoption attorney. He said it was a closed adoption, that all the records were sealed. He said the family was good people, that your son would be loved and well cared for. But he never gave me any details. I think he was afraid if I knew anything, I might try to interfere. Rebecca was already typing on her phone. What was the adoption attorney's name? Martin something. Martin Garrett, I think. He had an office in New Jersey. On it, Rebecca said grimly, stepping away to make calls. I looked at Octavia, this woman who had carried my son's half-brother in her womb, who had loved Oliver enough to believe his lies, who had spent 27 years living with the consequences of choices she made when she was too young and scared to know better. I wanted to hate her. I wanted to scream at her, to hurt her the way I was hurting, but I couldn't, because she was a victim too. Did you know I didn't know? I asked quietly. Did you know Oliver never told me the truth? Yes. Octavia met my eyes. I figured it out after a few years. The way you looked in the photos he sent, so happy, so completely in love with Emmett, so clearly believing he was yours biologically. If you had known, you wouldn't have looked at him that way. You would have looked at him the way I did in the one photo I have of myself, holding him in the hospital before they took him away, like your heart was breaking, even as you tried to memorize his face. She stood up slowly, walked to a battered desk in the corner, and pulled out a worn manila envelope. Inside was a single Polaroid, faded and creased from being handled too many times. A much younger Octavia lying in a hospital bed, exhausted and pale, holding a tiny newborn wrapped in a blue blanket. The baby's face was barely visible, but I could see dark hair and closed eyes. My son. The son I had raised for 27 years. Her son. The baby she had given birth to and then had stolen from her by a man who had manipulated both of us with terrifying precision. You can keep that if you want, Octavia said softly. I have it memorized anyway. I took the photograph with trembling hands. Does Emmett know? Has he ever suspected? Not from me. I promised Oliver I would never contact him, and I kept that promise. Even when I saw him around the city sometimes. New York is big, but it's not that big. I never approached him. I wanted to so badly. There were times I followed him just to see where he worked, what coffee shops he liked, who his friends were. But I never spoke to him. I figured if I did, Oliver would cut off the payments and I would lose even the tenuous connection I had. Rebecca came back, her expression grim. Martin Garrett died in 2006. His law practice was dissolved, and most of his files were destroyed. But I have a contact at the New Jersey Bar Association who might be able to track down where his old records ended up. It's going to take some time. I don't have time. I looked at the photograph of Octavia holding newborn Emmett, then at the woman standing in front of me who had lost 27 years with her son. Oliver is in a coma. He might wake up or he might die. Either way, I need to find my biological son before I make any decisions about what to tell Emmett. I need to know that both of these boys are okay before I detonate their entire lives with the truth. Both of these boys are 27 years old, Rebecca said gently. They're not children anymore. They're adults who deserve to know where they came from. I know, but I need to know what I'm dealing with first. I turned to Octavia. You're going to help me find my son. And then we're going to figure out together how to tell Emmett the truth about who his mother really is. Do you understand? Octavia nodded, fresh tears streaming down her face. I'll do whatever you need, whatever it takes. I owe you that much. I owe both of them that much. I walked to the door, then paused and looked back at her. For what it's worth, I believe you were a victim too. I believe Oliver manipulated you when you were vulnerable. But that doesn't change the fact that you made choices that destroyed lives. Mine, your son's, my biological son's. So you're going to help me fix this, even if it takes everything you have left. Agreed? Agreed, she whispered. I left her studio with Rebecca at my side, and the photograph of Octavia holding newborn Emmett burning a hole in my purse. 27 years ago, my husband had committed a crime so monstrous that I still couldn't fully wrap my mind around it. He had stolen my biological child and replaced him with another woman's baby without my knowledge or consent. He had condemned that woman to a lifetime of grief and guilt. He had sent my biological son to strangers whose names and location I didn't know. And he had done it all so smoothly, so completely, that I had spent almost 3 decades living a lie and never suspecting a thing. I didn't go back to the hospital that day. I couldn't look at Oliver's unconscious face and pretend I still cared whether he lived or died. Instead, I went home and stared at the photograph of the son I had raised and wondered how I was ever going to tell him that everything he believed about his identity was a carefully constructed fiction. And somewhere out there, I had another son who had no idea I existed. A son who had been ripped away from me hours after birth and given to strangers. A son who deserved to know the truth just as much as Emmett did. Oliver had stolen both of them from me in different ways. And now I was going to find them both and bring this whole house of lies crashing down around his legacy, whether he was conscious to witness it or not. Rebecca's contact at the New Jersey Bar Association came through faster than expected. 3 days after my confrontation with Octavia, I received a call that changed everything. I found the records, Rebecca said without preamble. Martin Garrett's files were transferred to another attorney when he died, someone who handled the dissolution of his practice. Most of the adoption records were sealed and sent to the state archives, but there was one file that got flagged because the adoption was never fully finalized. My hand tightened on the phone. What does that mean? It means that the family who was supposed to adopt your biological son backed out at the last minute. According to the notes, they had concerns about the legality of the adoption process. Martin Garrett scrambled to find another placement, and he did, but it was rushed. The new family lived in Oregon. Their names were David and Patricia Hayes. Oregon. My son was in Oregon, or at least he had been 27 years ago. I need their contact information. I need an address, a phone number, anything. Already ahead of you. David Hayes died in 2019. Patricia Hayes still lives in Portland. But Linnea, there's more. Rebecca paused, and I could hear her taking a breath. I found your son. His name is Christopher Hayes. He's 27 years old, and he's a pediatric resident at Oregon Health and Science University Hospital. He's married to a woman named Emily, and according to his social media, they're expecting their first child in 2 months. I sat down on my bed because my legs had stopped working. Christopher. My son's name was Christopher. He was a doctor. He was married. He was about to become a father. I had a grandchild on the way that I had never known existed. "Send me everything you have," I said, my voice shaking. "Address, phone number, workplace, everything. Linnea, you need to think about this carefully. You can't just show up in this man's life and tell him his entire origin story is a lie. He has adoptive parents who raised him. He has a life. You need to consider—" "I need to see him." I cut her off. "I need to look at my son and make sure he's okay. That's all. Just once. Just to know that Oliver didn't destroy him the way he destroyed everything else." Rebecca was silent for a long moment. "Okay, but I'm coming with you, and we're doing this carefully. No ambushing him at work, no dramatic confrontations. We approach this like rational adults who understand that he's the innocent party in all of this." I booked a flight to Portland for the next morning. I didn't tell Emmett where I was going. I told him I needed a few days to clear my head, that the stress of Oliver's condition was overwhelming, that I would keep my phone on if anything changed at the hospital. More lies piled on top of the mountain of lies that had become my life. Octavia called me the night before I left. "Take this," she said when I answered. "It's the only other photograph I have, from the ultrasound, before everything happened. Before Oliver convinced me to give up my baby." She emailed me a grainy black and white image. A 20-week ultrasound showing a tiny fetus curled up and perfect. Written at the bottom in faded ink, "Baby Larson, 20 weeks, August 1996. Emmett. This was Emmett before he was Emmett. Before Oliver stole him and gave him to me and convinced both his biological mother and his adoptive mother that this was somehow the right thing to do. I cried myself to sleep that night, holding my laptop, staring at that ultrasound image, mourning the pregnancy I never had with the son I had raised, mourning the pregnancy I did have with the son I never got to raise. The flight to Portland was 5 hours of hell. I couldn't read, couldn't sleep, couldn't think about anything except what I would say to Christopher when I finally saw him. Would he look like me? Would I see myself in his face the way I had always looked for myself in Emmett's face and never found it? Rebecca met me at the airport. She had flown in separately, wanting to do advance reconnaissance before I arrived. "He lives in a small house in the Selwood neighborhood with his wife," she briefed me as we drove into the city. "He works 12-hour shifts at the hospital, usually 4 days a week. Today is one of his work days. He gets off at 7 p.m. I have his schedule for the next month if you want to plan multiple visits, but I'm recommending we do this all at once. Rip the bandage off." "Does he know he was adopted?" "According to the research I did, yes. Patricia Hayes is pretty active in her church community, and I found an interview she did with a local parenting magazine back in 2005 about raising an adopted child. She talks about telling Christopher the truth when he was young, making it a normal part of his story rather than a secret. So he knows he was adopted. He just doesn't know the circumstances were criminal." We waited in the hospital parking lot for 6 hours. Rebecca brought coffee and sandwiches that I couldn't eat. I must have checked my reflection in the car mirror 100 times, wondering if I looked old, if I looked like someone who had spent 27 years raising another woman's child while my own child grew up across the country with strangers. At 7:18 p.m., Christopher Hayes walked out of the main entrance of Oregon Health and Science University Hospital. I knew him instantly. It was like looking at a male version of myself at 27. He had my blonde hair, lighter than I had remembered mine being at his age. He had my blue eyes, the exact shade that I saw every morning in the mirror. He had the dimple in his chin that my mother had, the one I had always looked for in Emmett and never found because Emmett had Octavia's features, not mine. He looked tired but happy, his scrubs rumpled from a long shift, a backpack slung over one shoulder. He was talking on his phone as he walked toward the parking area, laughing at something the person on the other end said. He looked healthy, successful, normal, like someone who had been loved and cared for, not like someone who had been trafficked as a newborn and sold to the highest bidder. "That's him," I whispered unnecessarily. Rebecca already knew. "What do you want to do?" I watched my son unlock a sensible Honda Civic and toss his backpack in the back seat. I watched him check his phone one more time before getting in the car. I watched him drive away, completely unaware that his biological mother was sitting 50 yards away, having a complete emotional breakdown. "I want to talk to him," I said. "Tonight. Right now, before I lose my nerve." Rebecca looked at me with concern. "Linnea, you're not in any shape." "I'm never going to be in the right shape for this conversation. There is no right shape. There's just doing it or not doing it, and I've spent 27 years not doing it because I didn't know I needed to. I'm done waiting." We followed Christopher's Honda to a modest craftsman house in a neighborhood full of young families. He parked in the driveway next to a Toyota SUV. A woman came out the front door as he got out of his car, petite, dark-haired, very obviously pregnant. Emily, his wife, my daughter-in-law, the mother of my grandchild. They kissed on the front porch, his hand resting gently on her swollen belly. They looked so happy, so completely, blissfully unaware that their lives were about to be torn apart by information they never asked for. I got out of the car before I could talk myself out of it. "Linnea, wait," Rebecca called after me, but I was already walking up the driveway. Christopher and Emily turned to look at me, their expressions shifting from surprise to wariness. A strange woman approaching their house at dusk was never a good sign. "Can we help you?" Christopher asked politely, instinctively moving slightly in front of his pregnant wife. I stopped at the bottom of their porch steps, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. This was insane. I was insane. I should have called first, should have sent a letter, should have done literally anything other than ambush my biological son at his home without warning. But the words came out anyway. "Dr. Hayes, my name is Linnea Vanderberg. I know this is going to sound completely crazy, but I need 5 minutes of your time. It's about your biological origins, and I promise you, it's important." Christopher's expression shifted from wariness to confusion. Emily's hand went to his arm protectively. "I know I was adopted," he said slowly. "My parents told me when I was 10, but they said it was a closed adoption. They said my birth mother was a teenager who couldn't keep me. They said they didn't have any information about her. They lied to protect you," I said, my voice breaking. "Or more accurately, they were lied to by the people who arranged your adoption. Dr. Hayes, I'm not here to disrupt your life or make demands. I'm here because 3 weeks ago, my husband went into a coma, and I discovered something in his medical records that led me to the truth about what happened 27 years ago. The truth about how you ended up with David and Patricia Hayes instead of with me." I reached into my purse and pulled out the folder Rebecca had prepared. Documentation. Evidence. Proof that what I was saying wasn't the delusion of a disturbed woman. "I'm your biological mother," I said, tears streaming down my face now. "And your father, your biological father, committed a crime that I didn't discover until last week. I understand if you don't believe me. I understand if you want me to leave, but please just give me 5 minutes to show you what I found. That's all I'm asking." Christopher looked at Emily. Some wordless communication passed between them. Then he looked back at me, and I saw something in his eyes that gave me hope. Not belief exactly, but curiosity. The scientific mind of a doctor who wanted to see the evidence before making a diagnosis. 5 minutes, he said. "But we're staying on the porch, and my wife is calling a friend to come over, just as a precaution." "That's fair," I said. "That's more than fair." I climbed the porch steps and handed him the folder containing lab results, birth certificates, the photograph of Octavia holding newborn Emmett, the bank statements showing 27 years of payments. Everything that proved my impossible story was true. Christopher opened the folder and started reading. I watched his face change as he processed the information, confusion giving way to shock, shock giving way to something darker. Emily read over his shoulder, her hand covering her mouth. When he finally looked up at me, his blue eyes, my blue eyes, were wet with tears. "Who are you?" he whispered. "Who is my biological father? And what the hell happened to me?" We sat in Christopher's living room for 6 hours that night. Emily made tea that nobody drank and ordered pizza that nobody ate. Rebecca stayed in the car at first, giving us space, but eventually I called her in to corroborate the investigation she had conducted. Christopher listened to everything with the focused intensity of someone trained to absorb complex medical information under pressure, occasionally stopping me to ask clarifying questions, to examine documents more closely, to verify dates and timelines. When I finally finished explaining everything, Oliver's affair with Octavia, the planned baby switch, the bribed nurse, the adoption arranged without my knowledge, the 27 years of lies, Christopher sat back on his couch and stared at the ceiling for a full minute without speaking. "I need to process this," he finally said. "I need to understand what you're asking from me. Because right now, it sounds like you're telling me that I was stolen from you as a newborn, that the man who stole me is currently in a coma, and that somewhere in New York, I have a biological half-brother who doesn't know he was also stolen from his birth mother. Is that an accurate summary?" "Yes," I said quietly. "That's exactly what I'm telling you. And what do you want from me? Do you want a relationship? Do you want me to come to New York? Do you want me to press charges against a man in a coma? What's the end game here?" It was such a reasonable question, such a rational, doctor-like way of approaching an utterly irrational situation. And I realized I didn't have a good answer. "I don't know," I admitted. "I came here because I needed to see you. I needed to know that you were okay, that Oliver hadn't destroyed your life the way he destroyed mine and Octavia's. I needed to look at my biological son and know that at least one person in this nightmare came out unscathed." "Unscathed?" Christopher's laugh was bitter. "I just found out that everything my parents told me about my adoption was a lie. I found out that I'm the product of what amounts to human trafficking. I found out that I have a biological brother who doesn't know I exist. How is any of that unscathed?" Emily put her hand on his knee. "Chris, she didn't do this to you. She's a victim too." "I know that." He rubbed his face with both hands. "I know. I'm sorry. This is just a lot to take in." I understood his anger. I had been living with that same anger for the past 3 weeks, and I had the advantage of discovering the truth gradually. Christopher was getting it all at once, an entire lifetime of lies revealed in a single evening. "Your parents," I said carefully. "David and Patricia, did they know? Did they know that the adoption was illegal?" "I don't know. My dad never talked about it much. He died 5 years ago from a heart attack. But my mom—" Christopher paused, something crossing his face. "My mom always seemed guilty about something. She would get this look sometimes when I asked about my birth parents, like she was hiding something. I thought it was just because the adoption was closed, and she felt bad that she couldn't give me more information. But maybe she knew more than she let on." "We need to talk to her," Rebecca said, speaking up for the first time. "If Patricia Hayes has information about Martin Garrett's operation, about how the adoption was arranged, it could help us understand the full scope of what Oliver did." "My mother is 73 years old," Christopher said sharply. "She has high blood pressure and anxiety. You want me to confront her with evidence that she might have been an accessory to baby trafficking?" "I want to know the truth," I said. "All of it, not just the parts that are comfortable. If your mother knew that my baby was being taken from me without my consent, then she's not innocent in this. If she didn't know, then she deserves to understand what really happened to the son she raised." Christopher looked at his wife. Emily nodded slowly. "He's right that she's fragile, but she's also strong, stronger than people give her credit for. And she would want to know. She's spent 27 years feeling guilty about something. Maybe it's time she understood what she's actually guilty of, if anything." We drove to Patricia Hayes' house the next morning. It was a tidy ranch-style home in a quiet suburb, with a garden full of roses and a small American flag on the porch. Christopher had called ahead, told her he was bringing some people to discuss something important about his adoption. She had sounded worried on the phone, he said, but also resigned, like she had been expecting this conversation eventually. Patricia Hayes opened the door before we reached the porch. She was small and neat, with short gray hair and Christopher's smile. She took one look at me and went white as a sheet. "Oh my God," she whispered. "You look just like him. You're his birth mother." So she had seen me before, in the hospital maybe, or in photographs that Martin Garrett had shown her. She had known all along that I existed. "Mrs. Hayes," I said as gently as I could manage, "we need to talk about March 1997, about how you came to adopt Christopher, about what you knew and when you knew it." Patricia looked at her son, her eyes filling with tears. "Christopher, I wanted to tell you so many times. I wanted to explain, but your father made me promise we would never speak of it. He said it would only hurt you to know the truth." "What truth, Mom?" Christopher's voice was strained. "What did Dad make you promise to hide?" Patricia stepped back, letting us into her home. The living room was filled with photographs of Christopher at every age, baby pictures, school portraits, graduation photos, his wedding day. A shrine to the son she had raised and loved for 27 years, even knowing that he came to her through questionable means. She sat in an armchair that looked like it had been David's favorite, her hands folded tightly in her lap. We had been trying to adopt for 3 years. We went through the state system, private agencies, international adoption processes. Every time, something fell through. Either we were too old or we didn't have enough money, or the birth mother changed her mind at the last minute. We were about to give up when Martin Garrett contacted us. He said he had a special case, a healthy newborn boy whose adoption had fallen through at the last minute because the original family had concerns about the legality of the process. He said he needed to place the baby quickly, within 48 hours, and that if we could pay a premium fee and not ask too many questions, the baby could be ours. "How much?" I asked, my voice hollow. $75,000, all our savings plus a loan from David's parents. Martin said it was high because of the rush and the complexity of the situation. He said the baby's birth mother had agreed to the adoption, but there were complications with the paperwork that needed to be expedited. "Did he tell you who the birth mother was?" Rebecca asked, her phone out and recording. "No. He said it was a closed adoption, that the birth mother didn't want any contact. He said she was young and wanted to move on with her life. He showed us a medical history that said both birth parents were healthy, no genetic conditions, good family background. Everything looked legitimate. We signed the papers on March 17th, and they brought Christopher to us on March 18th. He was 6 days old. 6 days. My son had been in foster care or with some temporary guardian for 6 days between when he was stolen from me and when the Hayes family took him home. 6 days when he was alone in the world, belonging to no one. "Did you ever suspect something was wrong?" I asked. Patricia's hands twisted in her lap. "Yes. Not at first, but after a few years. Christopher was maybe 4 years old when I saw a news story about a baby trafficking ring that had been busted in New Jersey. The description of how it worked, bribing hospital staff, falsifying adoption papers, rushing placements before anyone could ask questions. It sounded exactly like what we had gone through. I asked David if we should look into it, if we should contact someone. But he said that even if there had been irregularities in the adoption, Christopher was legally ours now, and trying to investigate would only risk losing him. He said we needed to protect our family, not potentially destroy it over suspicions we couldn't prove. "So you did nothing," I said flatly. "We loved him." Patricia's voice cracked. "We raised him and protected him and gave him everything we had. Yes, I suspected something might have been wrong with the adoption process. But what was I supposed to do? Give back the son I had spent 5 years raising? Turn ourselves into the police and risk him being taken away? I chose my son. I chose to protect Christopher. Maybe that makes me a terrible person, but I would make the same choice again." Christopher had his head in his hands. Emily was crying silently beside him. There's something else you need to know, I said to Patricia. Christopher isn't just my biological son. He also has a biological half-brother named Emmett, who is the same age, born 3 days after him to a woman named Octavia Larson. My husband Oliver, Christopher's biological father, arranged for Emmett to be switched with Christopher at birth, so that I would raise Octavia's son thinking he was mine, while Christopher was adopted out to you. It was all planned, all orchestrated, all paid for. And none of the women involved, not me, not Octavia, not you, were given the full truth about what was really happening. Patricia put her hand over her mouth, her face crumpling. There's another mother? Another woman who lost her baby? Yes. And she spent 27 years receiving guilt money from my husband, while watching her biological son grow up in photographs he sent her, never being allowed to have a relationship with him. This is insane, Christopher said, his voice muffled by his hands. This is absolutely insane. How did one man orchestrate something this complex? How did he keep it secret for almost 3 decades? Money, Rebecca said bluntly. Money and power and a complete lack of conscience. Oliver Winthrop paid off a nurse, paid off an attorney, paid off a birth mother, and paid a desperate couple a premium to take a baby without asking too many questions. And he got away with it because everyone involved had something to lose by telling the truth. What happens now? Emily asked quietly. What do we do with all this information? That was the question I had been dreading, because I knew what had to happen next, and it was going to destroy at least one more person before this was over. I have to tell Emmett, I said. I have to tell the son I raised that his biological mother is alive and wants to know him, that the man he thinks is his father actually stole him from another woman, that everything he believes about his identity is a lie. And if he doesn't want to know? Christopher asked, looking up at me with eyes that were so much like mine it hurt. If he decides that the truth is too painful and he wants to keep living the life he's always known, then I'll respect that. But he deserves the choice, just like you deserve the choice to hear this or not. I looked at Patricia. Just like all of us deserve the choice to know the truth instead of living with lies that someone else decided were better for us. Christopher stood up and walked to the window, staring out at his mother's rose garden. I want to meet him. Emmett, my biological brother. I want to know what kind of person he is, what his life has been like. I want to understand what we lost by being separated. Are you sure? I asked softly. Meeting him means potentially turning his entire world upside down. It means forcing him to confront the same truth you just learned. I'm sure. He turned to face me, and I saw determination in his expression that reminded me of myself. We've both spent 27 years living in a reality that was constructed by someone else's crimes. We both deserve to know each other, to decide for ourselves what kind of relationship we want to have. And we both deserve to look the people who did this to us in the eye and demand answers. Oliver is in a coma, I reminded him. He might never wake up. He might never have to answer for any of this. Then we'll make him answer anyway. Christopher's voice was hard. Through lawyers, through the media, through whatever means necessary. My biological father doesn't get to commit crimes against multiple people and then escape consequences by being unconscious. I flew back to New York the next morning with Christopher and Emily. Patricia wanted to come too, but Christopher convinced her to stay in Portland, at least until we understood how Emmett was going to react. Rebecca went ahead of us, already working on building a legal case for what we were starting to call the Hayes-Winthrop baby trafficking conspiracy. On the plane, Christopher pulled out his phone and showed me photos of his life, his graduation from medical school, his wedding, ultrasound images of the baby he and Emily were expecting. I had a good childhood, he said quietly. My parents, my adoptive parents, loved me. They made mistakes, maybe criminal mistakes by not investigating the adoption more thoroughly, but they gave me a stable home and a good education and unconditional love. I don't want you to think that Oliver destroyed my life. He didn't. He complicated it. He lied about it, but he didn't destroy it. I'm glad, I said, and I meant it. I'm glad you had love, even if it came through terrible circumstances. But Emmett, Christopher continued, he doesn't even know he had a choice. He doesn't know there's a biological mother out there who gave him up thinking it was the only way he could have a good life. That's not fair to him, and it's not fair to her. You have to tell him, Linnea. You have to tell him everything. We landed at JFK at 6 p.m. I went straight to the hospital where Oliver was still in his coma, still attached to machines that breathed for him and monitored his brain activity. Dr. Shaw saw me enter the ICU and pulled me aside. Mrs. Vanderberg, we need to discuss your husband's care. He's not improving. We need to consider whether continuing aggressive treatment is in his best interest or whether it's time to discuss comfort measures only. In other words, whether it was time to let Oliver die. I looked through the window at my husband of 28 years, the man who had stolen children and manipulated women and built an empire of lies that was now crumbling around his legacy. Part of me wanted him to wake up so I could watch him face the consequences of what he had done. Part of me wanted him to die so I would never have to see his face again. I need 48 hours, I told Dr. Shaw. I need to settle some family matters before we make any decisions about his care. Can you give me that? Of course. His condition is stable for now. 48 hours won't make a significant difference medically. I called Emmett and asked him to meet me at the apartment. It was time. Time to tell my son, Octavia's son, that nothing about his life was what he thought it was. Time to introduce him to his biological brother and his biological mother. Time to watch his world shatter the way mine had shattered 3 weeks ago. And time to decide, together with all of Oliver's victims, what justice looked like for a crime that had been hidden for 27 years. Emmett arrived at the apartment at 9 p.m., still in his work suit, looking exhausted and worried. He had been holding vigil at the hospital for 3 weeks while I disappeared to Portland on what I had vaguely described as personal business. He deserved better than that. He deserved better than everything I was about to tell him. Mom, what's going on? You sounded strange on the phone. I had asked Christopher, Emily, Rebecca, and Octavia to wait in my study. I needed to tell Emmett alone first, needed to give him space to process before introducing him to the people who would fundamentally change his understanding of who he was. Sit down, sweetheart. I need to tell you something, and it's going to be difficult to hear. He sat on the couch where he had sat thousands of times throughout his childhood, in the home where he had always felt safe and loved. I was about to take that safety away from him, and I hated myself for it even as I knew it was necessary. I told him everything. I started with the blood test results that Dr. Shaw had shown me, moved through my discovery of Oliver's secret files, my confrontation with Octavia, my trip to Portland to find Christopher. I showed him the documents, the photographs, the bank statements. I watched his face change from confusion to disbelief to horror as he understood what I was saying. When I finished, he sat in silence for a full 5 minutes. Then he stood up and walked to the window overlooking Central Park, the same view he had grown up with, the same view that now meant something completely different. So, you're not my biological mother, he finally said, his voice flat. No, but I am your mother in every way that matters. I carried you in my heart for 9 months, thinking you were growing inside me. I raised you. I loved you. I would die for you. Biology doesn't change that. And my biological mother is a woman named Octavia, who's been watching me from a distance my entire life, taking money from the man I thought was my father in exchange for her silence. Yes, she's here. She's waiting to meet you if you want to meet her, but only if you want to. Emmett turned to look at me, and I saw tears streaming down his face. And I have a biological brother, a half-brother, someone Dad created with you and then gave away so he could keep me instead. Christopher, he's also here. He flew from Portland because he wanted to meet you. Does he hate me? Emmett's voice broke. Does he hate me for getting to have the life that should have been his? No, sweetheart. He doesn't hate you. He understands that you're a victim in this too. We all are. Emmett sank back onto the couch, his head in his hands. How could Dad do this? How could he lie to all of us for 27 years? How could he look at me every day knowing that he stole me from my real mother? I don't know. I've asked myself that same question 1,000 times. I don't think we'll ever fully understand how Oliver justified what he did. But I do know that whatever twisted logic he used, it doesn't change the fact that you are loved. By me, by Octavia, by Christopher. You're not alone in this. He looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. Do you still love me? Now that you know I'm not really yours? I crossed the room and pulled him into my arms, the way I had done when he was a child having nightmares. You are mine. You will always be mine. Blood doesn't make a family. Love makes a family. And I have loved you since the moment they placed you in my arms 27 years ago. That will never change. We stayed like that for a long time, holding each other while the reality of our situation settled over us like heavy snow. Finally, Emmett pulled back and wiped his face. I want to meet them, Octavia and Christopher. I want to understand where I really came from. I brought them in one at a time. First Octavia, who stood in the doorway looking terrified and hopeful. Emmett stared at her, seeing for the first time the woman who had given birth to him, whose features he had inherited. Her green eyes, her sharp cheekbones, her long fingers that he had unconsciously used his entire life to create and build and fix things. Hi, she said softly. I'm Octavia. I'm your biological mother, and I've wanted to meet you properly for 27 years. Emmett stood frozen for a moment, then crossed the room and hugged her. She sobbed against his shoulder, her hands clutching his back like she was afraid he would disappear if she let go. I'm sorry, she kept saying. I'm so sorry I let him take you from me. I'm so sorry. You were a victim too, Emmett said, his own voice thick with tears. You didn't have a choice. He took that choice away from you. Then Christopher came in, and I watched my two sons meet for the first time. They stood facing each other, these two men who shared a father but had lived completely separate lives, and I saw recognition pass between them. Not physical recognition. They looked nothing alike, Christopher with my blonde hair and blue eyes, Emmett with Octavia's dark features, but something deeper. A shared understanding of what it meant to be the collateral damage of Oliver Winthrop's crimes. I'm your brother, Christopher said. Or half-brother, technically. But brother is good enough for me if it's good enough for you. Emmett nodded, unable to speak. They shook hands awkwardly. Then Christopher pulled him into a hug. We got robbed, he said quietly. We got robbed of 27 years of knowing each other. But we can't change that. We can only decide what we do with the time we have left. We spent the rest of that night in my living room, all of us together. Me, Emmett, Christopher, Emily, Octavia, and Rebecca. We shared stories and photographs and tears. We began the painful process of rebuilding our understanding of who we were to each other. Not the family Oliver had engineered through manipulation and crime, but a family we were choosing to become through honesty and forgiveness. At midnight, I received a call from the hospital. Oliver had taken a turn for the worse. They needed me to come immediately to make decisions about his care. I'm coming with you, Emmett said. So am I, Christopher added. We stood in Oliver's ICU room, the three of us, looking at the man who had created this impossible situation. The machines beeped and hissed. Oliver lay unconscious, his face peaceful, unaware that all his secrets had been exposed. Dr. Shaw explained the medical situation. Oliver's brain activity was minimal. Even if he survived, he would likely have severe cognitive impairment. The question was whether to continue aggressive treatment or shift to comfort care only. I looked at my sons, both of them, the one I had raised and the one I had birthed. This is a family decision. What do you both think? Let him go, Emmett said quietly. "He doesn't deserve to wake up and face what he did. He doesn't deserve the chance to explain or apologize or ask for forgiveness. Let him go." Christopher nodded. "I agree. But first, I want him to hear something." He leaned close to Oliver's ear and spoke clearly, distinctly. "My name is Christopher Hayes. I'm your biological son, the one you sold to strangers so you could keep the son you wanted instead. I had a good life despite what you did to me. I became a doctor. I'm about to become a father. I succeeded in spite of you, not because of you, and I want you to know that your crimes didn't destroy me. You failed." We authorized comfort care that night. Oliver died 3 days later without ever regaining consciousness. We held a small funeral with no eulogies, no celebration of his life and accomplishments. Just a burial, attended by the people whose lives he had damaged, witnessing the end of a man who had caused immeasurable harm. 6 months later, I stood in my gallery at an exhibition featuring Octavia's sculptures alongside contemporary works I had curated. Emmett was there with his girlfriend, a tax attorney he had met through work who had been remarkably understanding about his complicated family situation. Christopher and Emily were there with their newborn daughter, my granddaughter, who had Christopher's blonde hair and Oliver's olive complexion and Emily's gentle smile. Patricia Hayes had flown in from Portland, finally meeting Octavia face to face, two mothers whose lives had been forever altered by the same man's crimes. We had decided not to go public with the full story. Rebecca had built a case that could have destroyed Oliver's legacy and potentially sent people to jail. The nurse who took the bribe, Martin Garrett's associates, who had helped facilitate illegal adoptions. But in the end, prosecution would have hurt us more than it would have helped. It would have exposed Emmett and Christopher to media scrutiny, would have turned their private trauma into public entertainment. Instead, we created a private foundation with Oliver's estate, $15 million dedicated to adoption reform, supporting birth mothers, and helping adoptees find their biological families through ethical, legal means. We called it the Hayes-Larson Foundation, honoring both Christopher's adoptive family and Octavia's sacrifice. Oliver's name appeared nowhere in the materials. Emmett and Christopher had become genuinely close, talking several times a week, visiting each other regularly. Emmett had started calling Octavia on Sundays, slowly building a relationship with the woman who had given birth to him. It was awkward and complicated and sometimes painful, but it was real. It was honest. And me? I had 2 sons now instead of 1. I had a daughter-in-law and a granddaughter. I had a friend in Octavia, forged through shared trauma and survival. I had truth instead of lies, even though the truth had nearly destroyed me. Some nights, I still woke up angry, furious at Oliver for what he had stolen from me. The chance to raise my biological son, the years Emmett could have had with his biological mother, the brotherhood Christopher and Emmett should have shared from birth. But most days, I chose to focus on what we had built from the ruins of Oliver's deception. We had chosen each other, not because of blood or obligation or convenience, but because after everything had been stripped away, all the lies, all the manipulation, all the carefully constructed facades, we had looked at each other and decided we wanted to be family anyway. And that, I had learned, was more powerful than any bond biology could create. We were a family built on truth, on choice, on love that had survived the revelation of unforgivable crimes. We were broken and healing and real. Oliver had tried to play God with our lives, rearranging us like pieces on a chessboard to suit his desires. But in the end, we had taken those scattered pieces and built something he never could have imagined. Something honest, something chosen, something that belonged entirely to us. That was my revenge. That was my justice. Not destroying Oliver's legacy or seeing anyone punished, but taking his worst crime and transforming it into our greatest strength. We were a family. Not despite the lies that had created us, but because we had chosen truth over comfortable fiction. And no one, not Oliver, not his crimes, Not the weight of 27 years of deception could take that away from us.